On the 14th of September in 1920 at the Lowenbrau Keller, or the Lion's Beer Cellar, the Bavarian League was meeting, and Hitler showed up with his friends, and they drank some beer and stashed their beer mugs under the tables for ammunition. And Hitler gave a long speech, and a fight broke out, and the German Hells Angels trashed the place, fighting the Social Democrats with beer mugs and table legs. People were thrown down the stairs, and by the time the police showed up, the fighting was over, so the police told everyone to go home. And after the Lowenbrau fight, the Bavarian government gave Hitler a permit to carry a pistol, and he wore it on his hip in a holster with a cartridge belt. The town of Coburg invited Hitler to visit and make a speech, in October of 1922. So the German Hells Angels boarded a train with 800 members and a marching band, and while the city officials asked them not to march through town, they did it anyway. The citizens had been told not to pick any fights with the visitors, and the march was peaceful, so Hitler turned them around to do it a second time, and this time they marched through town with only the drums rolling, and the citizens of Coburg gave them the fight they'd come for, a rolling brawl that went on all day long and well into the night. As a result, Coburg became one of the strongest of all Hitler's groups, and between February and November of 1923 the Nazis gained 35,000 new members, and their treasury boomed, and the Nazi newspaper became a daily, and groups sending donations from other countries proved to Hitler that his message was welcome around the world. The Weimar government had asked Hitler to cut back on the number of meetings in 1922 and told the loitering Nazis to stay off the sidewalks, but Hitler had answered with his new favorite slogan, "Over my dead body." The authorities tried to ban the party from having public rallies, not on ideological grounds, but because they knew the Nazis were too poor to pay rent for any of the available public facilities. And on the 27th of January in 1923, the Nazis held 12 different rallies and called it their first party day. Hitler would race from meeting to meeting, even though the chief of police told him that the rallies were banned. And the next day, on the 28th of January, the German Hells Angels went to a public stadium and marched around in the snow with plenty of banners and flags flying. And the marching was pretty impressive because most of them had been trained in the military for the Great War. By the spring of 1923, the German Hells Angels had quite a following, and 1,300 of them gathered on May Day to fight communists. But no communists came, and instead they were surrounded by police and told to go home and stay home. People thought that Hitler was finished, but he went off to the vacation town of Berchtesgaden to work on his speeches, and Hitler found a whip made of rhinoceros hide that he would crack as he practiced speaking, and when he came back in public at the end of the summer, Hitler had shined his shoes and wore better clothes and had gotten a new haircut. Part of Hitler's upgrade came from his American friend named PUTSCH Hanfstaengl, who was working for the American Hearst newspapers and had been in President Wilson's class at Princeton and then graduated from Harvard. PUTSCH introduced Hitler to his many rich friends and impressed Hitler with his piano playing, and PUTSCH enjoyed meeting Hitler's lower-class friends, having had little previous contact with that kind of people, and PUTSCH would play the piano for them. PUTSCH had met Franklin Delano Roosevelt and had played the piano at the White House for FDR, and PUTSCH invited Hitler to dinner and showed him a bathroom faucet for the first time with variable hot and cold water, and PUTSCH hosted Hitler at the Hanfstaengl house often. PUTSCH took Harvard's football songs and wrote Nazi lyrics for them and would play the piano while Hitler pretended to be the orchestra conductor, and while PUTSCH played the piano, Hitler practiced the hand gestures that would make him famous. Hitler went with PUTSCH to Berlin, and they spent many hours watching women boxers, and they stopped at Bayreuth, where the scenery from the last Wagnerian opera was still set up from before the Great War, waiting for the stagehands to return. Wagner's own production notes were still stuck up on the walls backstage, and Hitler called Wagner Baron Richard von Wagner and PUTSCH told Hitler that his great-grandfather had designed the original set. By the end of 1923, the hecklers in the crowds had faded away, and the protesters had stopped answering back. And while people would still complain to the police about the overflowing meetings, so many police were members themselves that it didn't do much good. And the police would just tell complainants that the party was not a police problem and to please move along. The economy had improved in Germany in 1923, so on the 30th of October, Hitler decided the time was ripe to take over Germany, and the plan to march on Berlin was scheduled in 2 weeks on Armistice Day with the code word sunrise. The plan was to seize the train stations, take over the telephone and telegraph offices, occupy the local government buildings, and take control of police headquarters. The plan should have worked, because the German Hells Angels were already friends with most of the army and they outnumbered the police, those police officers who'd not yet become members, and Hitler knew he could succeed in replacing all the government leaders while his newspaper carried a picture of Count York on the front page, and the seizure of Berlin would commence with the beer hall putsch in Munich. Hitler had been invited by the local officials to a town meeting in Munich on the 8th of November at the Bürgerbrau Keller, which in German meant where the people's brew is stored, and Hitler accepted the invitation even though he knew they only wanted to restore the Bavarian monarchy and weren't interested in the rest of Germany. Austrians thought the Bavarians were backward peasants, and there were 2 Russian Jews in the Munich government, and the Bavarians assumed they were communists. The future Pope Pacelli was in town that day, and Hitler had a toothache, but he went to the meeting anyway, and the beer hall could seat 3,000 at sturdy wooden tables, and the place was packed. Hitler showed up in a red Mercedes, and the police escorted him inside. And it was so crowded that PUTSCH couldn't even get in, but had to bribe his way through with American cigarettes, getting in at the very last minute, and so he was standing safely by the exit. PUTSCH bought 3 beers that cost 1,000,000 marks each, and Hitler was carrying his rhino hide whip, and the crowd had been drinking enough to drown out the speakers. The first speech was given by the leader of the Bavarian government, and the German Hells Angels had arranged beforehand for everyone to get free beer. Hitler set aside the beer he'd been nursing, pulled out his Browning pistol, and as the stormtroopers shouted, another group set up a machine gun positioned to rake the audience. Tables overturned in the uproar. A cabinet member scrambled for cover under his table. Some made for the exits in consternation, but were warned back, and if they resisted, were beaten or kicked. The Hitler phalanx was blocked, and if they resisted, were beaten or kicked. The Hitler phalanx was blocked, and amidst the uproar, he climbed onto a chair, waving his pistol. "Quiet," he shouted, and when the tumult continued, he fired a round into the ceiling. In the shocked silence, Hitler said, "The national revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded." No one was to leave the hall. Sweat poured down his pale face. He looked insane or drunk to some, but a few were struck by the ridiculous sight of a pistol-brandishing revolutionary in such a badly cut morning suit. Adolf Hitler, Volume 1, by John Toland, New York, Doubleday and Company, 1976, page 163-4. The government leaders were taken into a side room where Hitler apologized to them and promised them a promotion if they would cooperate, and then he went back into the main hall where people were laughing and calling it a Mexican Revolution, probably because Hitler had fired an American Browning pistol into the ceiling. Hermann Goering put another bullet into the ceiling, but the crowd kept laughing, so Goering ordered them to be quiet and just drink their beer, and then Hitler got on stage and started speaking, and everyone started listening, and then they began to applaud. Ludendorff showed up and shook Hitler's hand, and Röhm and the Rolling Thunder stormtroopers came marching up Ludwig Street with people lined up along the way, cheering and waving Nazi flags, and Röhm marched to army headquarters and went inside and unpacked some machine guns and rolled out some barbed wire skills learned on the battlefield during the Great War, but the man working the telephone switchboard betrayed them and ruined the entire plan. Meanwhile, at the beer hall, things seemed to be under control after Goering announced that the hostages would be shot if the police interfered. And then some German Hells Angels started fighting among themselves, and Hitler had to go settle the argument, leaving Ludendorff in charge, and Ludendorff allowed the hostages to go free on their sworn sacred oath to cooperate because Ludendorff thought that German officers could be held to their word since they were noble gentlemen like himself. Some of the Nazis picked a handful of foreign Jewish-sounding names out of the phone book and went to their homes and dragged them away, and Hitler's friend Röhm was arrested, and then it started to snow. The next day, the Nazi flag was flying at City Hall and above some other government buildings, and countless private homes were also flying the swastika flag, and the mainstream newspaper gave the affair a nice review in the morning, while Hitler and 2,000 German Hells Angels, carrying guns and grenades, marched into the heart of town to break Röhm out of jail. The Nazis marched 16 abreast, and they broke into spontaneous song, and Ludendorff was in the front row and took a wrong turn, and they came right up against the state police, and the chief of police started sword fighting with somebody's bayonet, and a loose shot got off, and a policeman fell over dead, and then all hell broke loose. A Russian soldier who'd fled the Red Revolution was killed, shielding Hitler from several bullets, pulling him to the ground and dislocating his shoulder, and 4 policemen were shot, and 14 German Hells Angels were killed, and the policeman had been shot for being on Hitler's side. Goering was hit in the groin but escaped arrest because a Jewish lady helped him to get to a private doctor, and as the march dispersed, the crowd waved and shouted to the Hells Angels as they carried their dead on their shoulders.